Thank y'all so much. It's such a treat to be here tonight. Thank you so much to Litchfield Jazz Festival for hosting and for sponsoring and for the Poli Club for having us. And that was a song by the great Oscar Peterson, my first big hero in the jazz world. That's a song called Kelly's Blues. And as mentioned earlier, I'm from Atlanta, and when I was 16 years old, I saw that Oscar Peterson was playing at Birdland in New York, and I begged my dad, can we please go? And he said, sure. And we got, even though we had a reserved seat, we had a ticket, I was so nervous for the whole experience that I made him get to the club 3 hours early, which was 2 hours before the doors opened. And I was so excited, and I'll never forget watching him walk on stage. I remember the great pianist Bill Charlap describes it as, you're about to go on a ride. It just was something special in the room. And it actually turned out to be, I think, his last performance before he passed away. And I was this idiot 16-year-old wearing shorts at an Oscar Peterson concert. But I went up to the owner of the club, who I did not know at the time, and I said, Oscar's my hero. Is there any chance I could meet him? And he said, sure. And he took me back, and I'm walking back like this. And I finally had my moment with him. And I said, Mr. Peterson, you're my hero. I flew up from Atlanta to see you. And he actually was really sad. He said, you flew up for this. He was really disappointed with his performance. But he opened up to me about that, which was just shocking. It was sad and shocking, but it was also inspirational in a way that he could be real with, again, an idiot 16-year-old wearing shorts at his concert. So it was so nice to have that experience, to meet him and to hear him live. I'll never forget it. And we got to play an Oscar Peterson song every show. And I like, Art Blakey has this term that says, music washes away the dust of everyday life. And to me, that's what playing the blues, opening a set, does for me, too. And we'll continue now with a song called Georgia's Sunset that I wrote about a nice sunset in Georgia. The only reason I say that is because when I put the album out, I did all these interviews on the radio, and they kept saying, so I guess your time in Georgia is coming to a close. And I'd say, what are you talking about? And they say, it's the sunset of your time in Georgia. I say, no, it's just about a nice sunset in Georgia. So just in case you needed clarification, just about a nice sunset in Georgia. I hope you enjoy Georgia's Sunset. Thank y'all very much. How about for Conway Campbell on the bass? Yes. Anton Kot on the drums. Thank you, Vita, for having us and for arranging this great band. This is a treat. Yes. And that was a song that I kind of wrote with the great Ramsey Lewis in mind, who we lost this past year. And I've lost a few of my heroes and mentors this past year, one being Ramsey and another being Ahmad Jamal. And I'll never forget one of my first big gigs. I was walking on stage and sitting basically right here was Ahmad Jamal, and I was scared to death, had no idea how to approach playing in front of him. I remember I could hear his entire, conversation. I could hear everything. We were sitting so close. He had a plate of food in front of him, and at one point I remember he was looking at me the whole show like this. He was really studying me, and I was really nervous. I was 23 or something. I've never played in front of a hero in my life, and that was the first experience. I remember at one point I heard his wife say, "Ahmad, eat," and I heard him say, "I'm busy." I got much more nervous. Again, I had no idea how to approach being in that situation. I felt a little more ready a few months later when I got to open for the great pianist Les McCann. And I was sound checking when he came into the club, and he was in a wheelchair, and they wheeled him up to the stage, and I remember thinking, oh, I'm so excited, I'm going to meet Les McCann. But he didn't say, hey, all he said was, play me some blues, boy. And I got really nervous once again, but I did okay, and after a couple of minutes, I heard him say, amen, so I knew I was doing something okay, and then he said, what's your name? And I said, Joe Alterman. He said, Alterman, are you a rabbi? And I said, no, but and I was trying to think of what to say. He said, well, are you a Hebrew? I said, yeah. He said, well, from now on, you're my Hebrew. And that was the start of our beautiful friendship. But eventually, I shared with him the story about playing in front of Ahmad Jamal, and he said he had a very similar story that he wanted to share with me. And he said he was playing his first big gig in Chicago, and he was about to go on stage, and walked Oscar Peterson, and he got very nervous. So he said he walked over to Oscar's table, and he said, Oscar, I love you, but I cannot play in front of you. And Oscar said something to him that changed his life. He said, Les, I didn't come here to hear me. I came here to hear you. And that kind of opened him up and made him feel like it was okay to be himself from then on. I wish I heard that story before playing in front of Ahmad Jamal, but it did not work out that way. But we want to play one more before bringing up our special guest. And this is a song that I heard Ahmad Jamal play one time, and I'll never forget it. This is Julie Stein's Time After Time. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been such a treat so far. It's about to be even more of a treat. I'm so excited. Downhill from here. Sorry, that's what I meant. No, I've loved listening to Ken Peplowski's music for a long time, and we've only spent a couple hours together, but it's been such fun and such a treat, and I'm excited to join y'all into the fun. Oh, thank you. But please join me in welcoming the great Ken Peplowski.
There's more mics up here than at an Irish funeral. Anyway, is this on? This is working? How about Joe Alterman? It's great, right? Yeah. Fantastic. I told you this. I heard you at the Birdland Theater one time, and I was blown away. So I'm so happy to be a guest on this program. You did go on a little long, so I'm going to have to, unfortunately, if you look in your programs, I had something special prepared for this evening. We're going to have to cut it. I had written, and we'd rehearsed this, right, all afternoon. We thank you for staying with us. We'd rehearsed, it was a special medley of songs from Wagner's Ring Cycle for you, but I had condensed it to 3.5 hours, but we don't have time now. We'll cut it. Yeah, we'll save that. Okay. This is working, right? Okay. Here's this tune by George and Ira Gershwin, and this is called Soon. Thank you. That one person back there. Thank you. Oh. What's that? Joe, can you show me where it says here, audience speaks? Is that anywhere on there? I don't see that. No, I don't. We're going to have fun tonight. That's what this is about, right? My ride's here. I'll play some music now. Thank you. This is this great group of musicians, really. Wonderful. You know, you're telling all these stories about meeting your heroes, and I just had my 64th birthday, May 23rd, and, well, that's not a big deal. Everybody always applauds, you know, as you get older, just because you're still alive. But you know, you're working with Houston. He's 112 tomorrow, you know, and he's my friend. I could say this. I was lucky because, you know, I moved to New York in 1981, and a lot of the great kind of, I always describe it as kind of the last wave of all the great kind of straight ahead back to the swing musicians. You know, I met and worked with Buck Clayton and Buddy Tate, Gus Johnson, the great drummer, and, you know, Milt Hinton. And very fortunate. It was just pure luck, really, because they were so nice, so supportive. And I got to play in Benny Goodman's last working band for the last year of his life. And but one of my all-time heroes, a person who I never got to work with, and I saw him a dozen times in concert when I was with Benny. We did a show at Radio City Music Hall that Frank Sinatra put on. He did a fundraising event every year at Radio City. And this year, this was the lineup. It was Sinatra, Benny Goodman, Placido Domingo, and Ella Fitzgerald. And whoever was on stage, the others were in the wings watching, and everybody was at the top of their form that night. Benny actually just blew us off the stage. He played so great. But I had to work up the courage to say something to Frank Sinatra, you know. And we're at all these rehearsals, and I see Sinatra backstage, and it seemed like he was standing by himself. And I'd read all those books, you know, and heard the stories about him punching people out and his temper and everything. And so I thought, I got to say something, because he was such an inspiration, not only to vocalists, but to every instrumentalist. I've actually spoken at Houston about this, you know. We always say, you know, if we could play with the same kind of emotion that somebody like Frank Sinatra sang with, without being able to use words, you know, we'd really have accomplished something. And that's always our goal when we play songs, you know. So I'm walking towards Sinatra, and it was like the scene in The Wizard of Oz when the Cowardly Lion is approaching the wizard. My knees are shaking, I'm sweating, you know. And all of a sudden, my path was blocked by these two, how could I refer to them? Goons, really. He had these two bodyguards, and this wall of muscle was between me and Frank Sinatra. And from behind the wall of muscle, I heard Sinatra's voice, you know, let him come forth. And the muscle parted, and I'm, you know, quaking in my boots. And I came up to him, and I you know, shook his hand, and I said, I'm working with Benny Goodman. Just want to tell you what an inspiration you've been to all of us jazz musicians. And you know how sometimes just a few words, somebody can say a few words, and it stays with you for the rest of your life. And he pointed to me, he turned to the guys he was with, 3 words he said, let him live. So I thought, you know, I had a little beating, but that was all. No, what really happened was, he patted me on the cheek and said, you're a sweet kid. And that was my encounter with Frank Sinatra. Anyway, but I can really relate to that, because we all have our heroes, and it never ends, you know. It's an endless parade of legends in this music. Speaking of legends, there's a songwriter that nobody ever talks about anymore. British songwriter named Ray Noble, he's an interesting songwriter because he only wrote maybe about 25, 30 songs, but they're all gems. Like he wrote The Very Thought of You, The Touch of Your Lips. He wrote a song called Goodnight, Sweetheart. And this next one, you may or may not know. Speaking of Sinatra, he liked it so much he recorded this twice in his career. And it's a beautiful song if you're a Duke Ellington fan, it's a little reminiscent of Duke Ellington's song, All Too Soon. But this was actually written before that. And it's a great song called Love Locked Out, which I'd like to dedicate to my ex-wives. You can Google that one later. Isn't that a beautiful song? Here's speaking of great tunes, Leonard Bern, is it always, I can never figure out, Bernstein or Bernstein? Frankenstein or Frankenstein? Bernstein. In his early career, he was writing some great songs, standalone songs. Well, not standalone, they were part of shows, but more in the standard form, like we tend to play. And we're going to do one of those right now that I love. This is called Lucky to Be Me. What, for this one more? What's that? Yes, I will plug it for you.
Oh, well, thank you.
We're going to do a song now that I recorded with this great Brazilian guitarist that I like to work with, Diego Figueiredo. And this is a great song by Antonio Carlos Jobim called Retrato em Branco e Preto, Portrait in Black and White. But before we play this, speaking of recorded, Joe, I know, has many CDs for sale here tonight. At least 3. Well, that's the start. I, of course, didn't bring any because I'm trying not to sell CDs because the guy that does my taxes said to me, every year, he says, Ken, you're a jazz musician. You're making far too much money. Stop that, So I'm trying, to cut back. Yeah. But Joe has CDs for sale. So, but we got a couple more songs. I'll make them brief. I know we're running. This is Portrait in Black and White. And interestingly enough, he based this on a Chopin piano prelude. I can see you're really impressed by that fact, but it is a gorgeous tune. Here it is.
thank y'all again so much. How about it once again for Ken Peplowski? Yes. Conway Campbell. Yes. Anton Kot. Yes. This has been such a treat. Thank you so much for having us, really. Thank you. We have time for one more. Hope you enjoy my shining hour. But thanks again for having us and for being here. All right.